Hello, welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. There is no Joe Devine. He is on annual leave, so we have been left with the responsibility of recording the pod. Anything could happen. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Seb. How are you doing?
I am doing fine. I do hate sort of hosting the podcast, though. It makes me nervous. It feels like I don't know where I go. I start speaking and it just goes in any direction. Anyway, we're going to talk about all kinds of things. So we kind of had a little bit of a different approach this time. Alex and I watched a lot of different games. I think the only game that we actually watched together was Arsenal West Ham. Not together, but at the same time, of course.
Social
so we're just going to go.
Was observed.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just going to go around Europe, check in with a few games, check in with a few talking points, and have a bit of a natter. Hope you enjoy it. Alex, I did not watch Bournemouth against Southampton. Why should I care about it?
Well, apart from the fact that the mighty Southampton are now through to a semi-final, which is, and we discussed this at the time, didn't we, briefly? Is it a good thing or not? There's always an argument that teams that are potentially close to a relegation battle, if not sort of in it, on the one hand, maybe they benefit from the momentum and the positivity that comes from a cup run. On the other hand, it's an additional set of games, and Southampton have struggled with a thin squad. But no, I suppose the main point was Nathan Redmond. Nathan Redmond had a superb game, scored twice, a beautiful assist for Mr. Gineppo as well. And it sort of struck me that he excelled against a championship club, albeit a good one. And this is not the kind of performance that we've seen from him regularly in the Premier League. And I guess there are a group of players, Dwight Gale is another one that springs to mind, that seem to be maybe slightly too good for the Championship, but not necessarily good enough to consistently deliver in the Premier League. And I think that was one of the odd things about this performance was you could see what Redmond is capable of doing on his day. But too rarely he takes a Premier League game by the scruff of the neck in that way.
He's a bit of a conundrum, isn't he? Because there have been points during his Premier League career where you think, goodness, you're a really, really good player. I remember that surge in form shortly after Ralph Hasenhüttl joined Southampton. And if I'm right in remembering, I think he was used mainly through the centre. And he was given much more responsibility, whereas previously under a succession of Southampton managers, he seemed to be either working off the left or the right, and in a team that I'm thinking particularly under Pellegrino and probably Claude Puel were quite slow moving, and he seemed to be so well suited to kind of a fast transition system.
Yeah, totally. I suppose that the thing that he's very good at is carrying the ball, making these dynamic runs. I think what was so nice for the assist for Gineppo in this game on Saturday was the ability to pause and then release the ball at exactly the right moment. And sometimes I think in the Premier League we see Redmond is too hurried in his decision making, so you still get the dynamism, you still get the ball carrying threat, but then there's a lack of end product from that. Maybe that's because he had a little more time on Saturday against a defence that wasn't perhaps at the same sort of level that you would regularly expect from a Premier League defence. But I think also this positional point that you make is, Redmond, I suppose he sort of struggled to fit in any given position and make it his own. He does have an ability to cut inside and come off the wing in that inverted 4-4-2 that Hasenhüttl likes. He can certainly play as a wide attacking player. Here he was operating more through the centre, like you say, and dropping off, and then turning to drive forwards with Gineppo sort of coming around outside him. But none of those positions immediately suggest themselves as where he should be playing all of the time. And I think that's the problem with someone like Redmond is he has the ability every so often to change a game with a piece of skill or a piece of ball carrying, but he's not nailing anything down. And I think in every position that he could play, Southampton have better alternatives.
On a different note, you weren't terribly fond of Sam Sturridge. We've got quite a defamatory note in our little pod plan here about his activities on Saturday afternoon.
It's not
Explain
defamation
yourself.
if it's not defamation if it's opinion. So there's a moment where
Some pretty
Salisu,
definitive words in this sentence.
the audience are now going, oh, what did he say? So Salisu is drawn off to the left hand side, covering over for a fullback, Bertrand pushing forwards, and he clears the ball and he's off balance, and Sturridge comes in very, very late, and catches him with kind of both elbow and shoulder. But there is absolutely no way that Sturridge is getting anywhere near the ball. There's about 10 minutes of the game left. Bournemouth are 3-0 down. Like, it's you sometimes see these late challenges that push players over the hoardings that are around the outside of the pitch in the course of play. And I don't really understand the point. I know at the beginning of a game, maybe you want to put down a physical marker on an opponent and say, hey, I'm here, welcome to the game kind of thing. But as the game gets deeper and deeper and players are surely aware that there's very little point in, at that point, putting down a marker, it just seems unnecessarily aggressive. And it's how players get injured. And I think in this season particularly, when injuries have been pretty high, that kind of stuff just is very unwelcome and pointless.
Yeah, I agree actually, because I think this might be terribly naive and wishful of me, but it seems as if during this season there should be a little bit more community spirit. Like everyone's in it together. We're all sort of trudging through this endless season, absolutely knackered. Do you know what I mean? It seems a bit sort of mean-spirited to be.
No, I think so. And don't get me wrong. I think if there's, like I say, if you're seeking in the early stages of a game to physically dominate an opponent, that is a part of football that I absolutely understand. But there is something about these sort of late charges. You sometimes see it when a player is shepherding a ball out for a goal kick, that kind of thing, and then the attacker goes through the back of them. There is no effort to win the ball there. And I just don't really understand, short of genuinely seeking to injure a player. And I'm not suggesting that that's what Sturridge was trying to do. And I think actually, by and large, most footballers are not trying to do that. But maybe the desire to impress, to show keenness, to show work ethic kind of spills over. And this season, like you say, with congested fixtures, with the issues that everyone's had with the lack of pre-season and that kind of stuff, you would just hope that players were maybe a little more collaborative in their approach to one another's well-being, which is why I said that Sam Sturridge was what he was.
Okay, we shall move on from Sam Sturridge. We'll have a little bit of a break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to rant about the state of Bundesliga defending. So the reason I didn't watch Southampton Bournemouth is obviously because I'm cool and European now, but also because I found the Bundesliga conference channel on German Sky, which kind of lets you, it's as it sounds basically. It's like a domestic version of the Champions League goal show on BT. It's absolutely brilliant. You just, because German football still has quite a lot of kind of Saturday afternoon kickoffs, you just bounce around the grounds, catch up with the goals, get little alerts when a goal's been scored in another game. It's terrific. And in this instance, it also alerted me to one of the best own goals I've seen in a really, really long time, which came at Eintracht Frankfurt, who were drawing 1-1 with Union Berlin about 15 minutes before half-time. Ball was kind of in the shallow right position of the Union half of the pitch. And the right back just turned around without looking and absolutely smashed the ball at his own goal. And didn't think to look up to see where his goalkeeper was. It was a Frank Sinclair special for older listeners who remember that weird period of time when Frank Sinclair, when he was at Leicester, just could not stop scoring really weird own goals. Awful. And it also made worse by the Union Berlin goalkeeper just losing his feet. He tried to kind of recover his position and just slipped, fell on his arse, and just watched haplessly and helplessly as the ball just trickled into his own net. And then there was another 3 goals before half-time, which is very strange. The point I wanted to make, though, is that Bundesliga defending is an absolute mess. every game I seem to watch at the moment, there is an absolute calamity. There was the less said about Bayern Munich's win over Stuttgart, the better, really, because you shouldn't be losing a game like that when you've got a man advantage. Alphonso Davies obviously sent off at 0-0, and then somehow they still lost 4-0. But I watched Cologne against Dortmund, and Thomas Meunier came up with a horrible error for Cologne's second goal. And there's just there's something about I don't know whether it was individual mistakes, but on Sunday there was also some terrible moments in Bayer Leverkusen's loss to Hertha Berlin. Just kind of lazy defending, like players waving legs at attackers rather than trying to actually tackle them, and just a real absence of positional acumen, and just all kinds of just atrocious defending, atrocious defending that you would never tolerate if the conditions were normal at the moment, or if there were supporters in the stands. It would just be horrendous to kind of the point I'm trying to make, without talking myself into another cul-de-sac again, is that it feels as if, like, the lack of tension in stadiums, mixed with the cumulative fatigue of what it is to play in this season, the number of games, the lack of rest, and the absence of any proper recovery period, it's just led to this kind of incredibly loose standard of defending. Like, do you agree with that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there is definitely a degree to which individual errors can often be explained by fatigue, loss of concentration. You see players doing things that they ordinarily wouldn't do. I do also wonder if this is compounded to a degree by this sense that teams have to be increasingly tactically complex, that they have to play out from the back. There's the number of games that I've seen recently where teams invite pressure onto themselves because they want to play out from the back. And I know, like, this sounds a little bit like old man shouts at cloud, doesn't it? Because the idea that teams shouldn't...
This is kind of what this podcast is. I hate to break it to you a couple of years in.
This is not my general vibe. But no, I mean, playing out from the back is something that a lot of good teams try to do and do effectively. And there seems to be a cadre of commentators that almost kind of lick their lips about the potential of a mistake around that, and then go, well, you see, I told you should just hoof it up. Get it clear. But
I find that annoys me so much, Alex.
Sure. Totally.
You have all these. I mean, from a ratio perspective, you have dozens and dozens and dozens of successful exits, and then one player makes a mistake, and all of a sudden you've got some kind of 50-something ex-pro chipping in with his kind of bang it 70 yards into the stand opinion.
The issue with that, and I completely understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you, but because football is such a low-scoring game, if you make in the course of a game 50 exits that work, and you make one that doesn't, and that's what leads to a goal, that is a really difficult balance to achieve. And I think you were talking on Twitter, was it last night, about Joe Rodon? And the idea that, you see, I do pay attention to what you say.
Yeah, you do. I'm impressed. Yeah.
About, how ball-playing centre-backs should be afforded the opportunity to make mistakes. And I completely agree with that in principle. But it is also, commensurately, when they do make a mistake that results in the goal, and obviously Rodon, his mistake didn't, but you can understand why that becomes a disproportionate problem. And this is a function of football. Like when we were talking about the Atalanta free kick in the last episode, there is a disproportionate weight put on events that lead to goals because goals happen so infrequently. That is just a function of a low-scoring game. And so it's a very easy narrative to build up that was a genius free kick, or that such and such a ball-playing centre-back shouldn't play out from the back because they concede goals. And I noticed this Chelsea Atletico Madrid. The only time Chelsea looked vulnerable was when they tried to play out from the back. You have seen it with Arsenal recently. You've seen it with plenty of teams. And I do wonder if this kind of combination of tactical demands that are difficult enough to realise even when you're in peak physical condition, because the game is increasingly tactically complex. You then couple that with maybe a lack of focus that comes from a lack of fans, with the exhaustion of the season, with the fact that systems like that really work best when it's a regular, consistent first 11 that all get used to one another. And of course, there's rotations and there's chopping and changing because of injuries and wanting to rest players and stuff. And sometimes simple isn't the worst thing in the world, you know? And it does it does allow teams to avoid these kinds of errors.
Can I make a counterpoint quickly? Because this is a
Please
little bit of a bugbear of mine. So I agree, like sometimes simplicity is a virtue. On the other hand, and we're going to talk about Arsenal West Ham in more depth a bit later, but at the moment in the Premier League, there's a spate of teams who do believe in simplicity and who, at the slightest opportunity, will just push the ball long because it's better out of our defensive third than in it. And if we take risks with the ball in that area of the pitch, we're going to concede goals. And I'm not quibbling with that. That's very true. The counterpoint, though, is that I believe that kind of exiting out of defence with short, retention phases is a really important part of quelling attacking pressure, like changing the momentum of the game, but also allowing physical recovery because you drop the pace of the game. Whereas if you bang the ball long, and I appreciate that not every team is just trying to pick out somebody in the stand, but generally speaking, if you go long, if you play a pass over sort of 50, 60 yards, it's going to get hoovered up by the opposition centre-backs and the other team's going to reset and they're going to attack. And West Ham Arsenal was a really good example of that for me because if you look at what happened in both halves, like West Ham's performance from 0 to about 40 minutes or whenever Lacazette scored his first goal to the rest of the game, I think that's kind of demonstrated. You have to, particularly during this season, you just can't seem to absorb the punches in the same way. Eventually, there's this inevitability about the way certain teams are defending at the moment. We've talked about Spurs probably too much, so let's move away from them. But West Ham were this weekend's example of that for me. And I don't know, I think whilst acknowledging the risks that come with playing out from the back, like I see it as a recovery phase, consolidating, allowing different players to recover in a way that sort of allows their concentration to stabilize. If a player is being constantly asked to run, cover, press, back up at fullback, for instance, I'm thinking maybe of like a wide midfielder. If you ask him to do that over 70 minutes, he's going to make a mistake because that's the relationship between fatigue and decision making. So I don't know. I appreciate I'm explaining this from the outside, and it's a little bit theoretical, but it makes sense to me, and that's kind of why I like it. It feels a bit more controlled.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and this is something that that I think, for example, Liverpool excelled at last season.
Exactly.
Where that there would be very, very fast starts to games, and Liverpool always had the ability to increase the tempo, become more vertical and more direct when they wanted to. But also, if you watch Liverpool games consistently, it wasn't hell for leather from minute 0 to minute 90. They would have fairly sustained periods of reducing the tempo, I think, for exactly that kind of reason. And yes, really good teams are able to not just to use build-up as an opportunity to pull the opposition out of position, and that's particularly the case if you're playing against a team that likes to engage a press high up the pitch. That is how you work through a press, by pulling players from one side to the other. But yeah, like you say, it also gives the team the opportunity to regroup a little bit. And I think this is the sort of thing that, for example, we are seeing enacted really skillfully, by and large, by Tuchel's Chelsea. The use of those central midfielders to keep possession, recycle the ball, burst forwards if there is the opportunity to do that through someone like Kovacic, but otherwise to kind of rely on the ability of the central defenders to bring the ball forwards or to keep possession among themselves. And I think central defenders increasingly have an important role in this, because if a team is able to keep possession for a sustained period of time, which in football only means like 10, 15 seconds anyway, doesn't it? Then the opposition will start to drop off and will start to create more of a compact shape. And that's when centre-backs can then bring the ball forwards which again tends to happen relatively slowly in the first instance, even if they then accelerate past that first line of the press. And yeah, it gives a team the opportunity to start engaging movements further up the pitch. So I guess, yeah, it does make sense. I think what I'm saying is that maybe at times a greater degree of pragmatism is called for, just because it's not going to work every time, and maybe that's a little bit curmudgeonly of me. I'm not going full Allardyce here.
I felt like happening. I felt like you hit the right notes of your brand there. That was okay. We've got to do a little segue, and I feel like if Joe was here and presenting, he would say something witty and whimsical, and that's not really my strength. So instead, what we'll do is we'll tell the story of what happened when accidentally Adonis texted the main podcast WhatsApp group, and Joe specifically told us
that didn't go well.
Yeah. So Adonis was just making a very fair point about what happened in the West Ham Arsenal game. And Joe, who, let's just say, was seemingly reveling in the fact that he had a week off, or was, a day ahead of his week off, just sent a very angry, block-capitaled, no vowel response to the group. Felt like it's kind of harsh.
Slapped him down, yeah. I guess Joe needs his Rocket League practice time. Or maybe he's sat there coming up with complex, witty new analogies to baffle us.
Just mute the group, Joe, innit?
That's the thing, Adonis. It's a very, very fair point, because then he did concede, there was about a minute of awkward silence in the WhatsApp group when, it kind of sort of what the fuck silence. And and then he just said, I've muted you now. And we haven't heard from him since. Anyway, I wanted to bring up something that came up in the WhatsApp group that we correctly used, which didn't involve Joe, which was just you and I. And that was your voice note, in which you talked about how, with a few managers' positions under threat over the last few weeks, I'm thinking probably of Peter Bosz at Leverkusen, Steve Bruce at Newcastle, a couple have already gone, obviously Allardyce at Chelsea, Lampard at Chelsea, Mourinho at Spurs, probably in the summer. You gave a very elegant, slightly weirdly toned. I wasn't quite sure where you were when you were saying this. It was I don't know.
I might have been outside having a cigarette.
It was quiet, and there were moments in that voice message which were quite sinister, just in tone, not in anything you said. Anyway, you made the point, which was very fair, that the group of managers who are attached or promoted for jobs at the very top of the game, that's a group which is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you just want to re-articulate what you said, because I thought it was an excellent point.
Yeah, so I guess it was, there are obviously some managers who are in positions at the moment. I mean, Lampard, yes, has gone, but you've got Solskjaer at United, you've got Pirlo at Juve, the sort of the ex-club legend group. But the cadre of what you might slightly, I don't know, gauchely call super managers seems to be very, very small. And there's a revolving cast of players coaches that are linked with the big jobs. So now Pochettino's gone to PSG recently. He's out of the mix. Tuchel has gone to Chelsea. He's out of the mix. But they are both those sorts of names. You'd probably add in Julian Nagelsmann. You'd definitely add in Klopp and Guardiola. But obviously I think they're again at the point where they make their own running, and nobody expects them really to leave those clubs unless something absolutely catastrophic happens, or they want to do it of their own agency. Mourinho, I think, is probably still considered in that bracket by some people.
Profile-wise, he's definitely in that bracket.
Profile-wise, he's definitely in it. In terms of his achievements, very much not so much. But what I find weird is that does seem like an incredibly condensed group, of whom the majority are now stably in jobs that they've either just come to or don't seem to be wanting to leave anytime soon. And so if a vacancy opens up, let's say putatively at Arsenal, Nagelsmann will be linked with it. And then who else is there? I mean, Allegri is out of work. He's quite good. You might add Antonio Conte to that list, but effectively, I think what we're seeing is that because managers or top level coaches now are also expected to represent a club brand, to bring something other simply than tactical and coaching acumen, the pool of people that could be really genuinely effective at top clubs in terms of everything they want to achieve, not just success on the pitch, but also brand promotion, commercial success, and so on, it's incredibly tiny. So you get really good coaches, people like Eric Ten Hag, for example, at Ajax, who you just can't envisage them being linked with a really, really top job. Even someone like Hansi Flick, for example, who has won a lot of stuff with Bayern in a short period of time, he's so kind of attached to just being at Bayern that, again, like where's the momentum? Where are the new coaches coming from? Where are the people that are rising up from lower levels? They might be really, really talented. Like, look at what Diego Martinez has achieved at Granada, for example. But the jump that needs to be made between them being extremely effective at a smaller club and entering that echelon of super managers just seems like an unbridgeable one at the moment.
I'm glad you brought up Granada, because that's quite interesting in the sense that I don't particularly enjoy watching Granada. And you and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, and I haven't actually seen them play for a couple of weeks now. I saw them in a Europa League game and some odd La Liga game about a month ago, and I haven't really paid attention since. And I think in a way that's part of the problem, in that you have good things going on in the game, but not in a way which really piques interest. Like it's not. It's an achievement beyond the club's means, absolutely. But there's no one out there at the moment who's kind of reached a critical mass of intrigue. There's not, like, for instance, like, do you remember when Marco Rosa was coming up prior to getting the Gladbach job, for instance? I also think, I think that's part of the problem, like a sort of a lack of branding, because coaches at that level of the game, at the very top, they're not really coaches, they're priests, aren't they? They represent little religions, and so when you've had a bad experience with, say, I don't know, Maurizio Sarri, you don't go deeper into the group of coaches represented by Sarri's thinking, or of whom Sarri's thinking is typical. You move in a different direction, and so each time you move in a different direction towards a different religion, in inverted commas, your choice is less and less. I don't know, maybe this is unfair, or maybe this is kind of a sign of the times. I feel like when things go wrong for a manager who was previously thought to be very, relatively interesting, intriguing, deserving of a good job, I feel like we damn them a bit quickly. I think Lucien Favre is the one that I think of there. Like, he's not young, Lucien Favre, but I feel like there's someone with some really interesting ideas who, yes, it didn't end very well at Dortmund, and that consequently looks like a bit of a mess, and it is a little bit of a stain on his copybook. But you just think, right, well, you can't manage a big club anymore because this has happened to you. I feel there's a bit too much of that at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's two other points I'd make. Firstly, I think that while obviously there's still significant tactical variation across top European teams, it's easier, like you say, to kind of coalesce coaches into groups. And that certainly at the very top of the game, there are certain systems and theories that predominate to a degree that maybe makes it harder for a coach to do something genuinely innovative. Gasperini at Atalanta, Chris Wilder at Sheffield United when he was there. These were coaches who really were doing something very different, and Gasperini continues to do. But it's harder to think of that. You just tend to get people who are more effective or more charismatic, and they're the ones that stick out. So there's probably lots of people that are actually really quite good at coaching, positional play or coaching pressing, and unless there's something about them individually that makes them stick out, the tactical stuff maybe doesn't have sufficient distinction or variation. I think the other point is that if you compare it to previous eras, it's harder than ever for somebody to pull off a surprise win. Yes, cup competition still to a degree have that opportunity, but
Surprise in what sense?
surprise in the
I mean,
sense
just
that
against the odds.
yeah, I mean, that there's the financial pull of the top European teams is such that, I mean, I said this in a video that we did a while back about when Porto won the Champions League under Mourinho, that the idea of a club outside of Europe's top 5 leagues, and really, if we're being honest, outside a group of maybe 10 or 12 clubs, that's effectively impossible now. And that was Mourinho's break into the big time, was showing that you could achieve something on a continental stage with an unfancied team that Porto are going to go and win this year's Champions League now to make me look stupid, but you know the point I'm making, that those sorts of surprises that can put a marker down and say, hey, I'm here, I deserve to be given an opportunity, that's quite limited now, I think. You do occasionally get these periods where something is in fashion. So in the post-Mourinho success era, English teams were increasingly interested in taking chances on Portuguese coaches. That was partly because tactical periodization was very in vogue. But again, like these sorts of things, it feels like that's drying up. It feels like the stakes are so high. The opportunity for the big clubs, the opportunity for smaller clubs to win something is so limited that really how a coach is showing their point of difference in a way that is significant enough for a super club to take notice, I think that's really, really hard. And so unless you're promoted from within, like Hansi Flick, or you're a club legend like Solskjaer or Pirlo, you've basically got to be one of about 6 or 7 people to be in genuine contention for one of those jobs.
This is one of my fears over the newly imagined Champions League format. By the way, Andrea Agnelli's Juventus lost to Benevento at home over the weekend. It's devastating. Just devastating to see
Benevento have got one of the loveliest badges. The Istragioni, the witches, yes.
Yeah,
sorceresses. Yeah. It's great fun.
On a not unrelated note, really, so, something that was going really, really well and has been turned to shit. Really? This is the guy that we're going to trust with a Champions League format that seems to be going quite well? Okay. Anyway, this is one of my concerns, because say you've got that. Yes, I understand that there's going to be one 36-team league, yes, but within that, there's going to be a tier system, an unofficial one of kind of elite clubs, who from the top divisions are competing at that level of the game consistently, and it's going to be hard never for them to fall out of that group. So how do you become a coach within that group if you don't have prior experience? Because is it going to be a new thing where basically what we create is a kind of gilded version of that, like, group of English managers who just rotate around clubs that are in relegation trouble each season?
Yeah.
It's going to be a merry-go-round. It's just going to occur in a different place. So you have a go at Juventus, you fuck it. You have a go at Barcelona, then you roll into Chelsea or, Arsenal, Man United, and you just keep going on the carousel because you are a quote-unquote proven commodity at that level of the game. In the same way that there's always kind of, I know we've moved away from it a little bit, but for a long time there was that resistance to managers who had never done it in the Premier League, or that's my fear. And then within that, you have to conform in a lot of other ways. So you have to be a particular type of character. You have to be, you have to fulfill a certain set of, be a commercial asset. And I think you are creating, not immediately, but over time, over the decades, potentially a homogenized type of head coach. And there is going to be less and less room for experimentation, because if you're in a situation where you're kind of protected, unless your season is an absolute catastrophe, or maybe even you have 5 seasons in a row which are an absolute catastrophe, you're not going to take risks. You're going to go with someone that might not do great, but will be fine. You're not going to say, right, well, I'm going to promote someone with this new set of ideas that is possibly seen as a little bit of a heretic from outside, and it's going to be interesting. That's a fear of mine. And also, are we going to have the exposure beneath that level for other coaches to build a reputation the same way that they can now? I don't know. Are you going to have a Gasperini, for instance? I know Gasperini has managed at bigger clubs in the past than Atalanta, but are you going to have someone like that who has enough access to the top of the game to be paid attention to, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, what I think could happen, to try and be a little bit more positive about it, and it chimes partly with the news that's been reported and built today that Xabi Alonso is being considered for the Borussia Mönchengladbach job, but also Steven Gerrard at Rangers, for example. I think there is scope potentially for ex-players who reputationally, were at the top of the game. I don't think anyone would doubt that Steven Gerrard and Xabi Alonso were genuinely superb players, but also that they have then gone and worked, not immediately in a top job, but they've both worked at youth levels. So Xabi Alonso worked for Real Madrid under-14s before going on to coach Real Sociedad's B team. Steven Gerrard worked within the academy system at Liverpool for a while before taking the Rangers job. That then affords them the opportunity, I think, to hone their skill before making a leap into really big football. And I suppose what I would like to see is coaches not being rushed or having the confidence to take smaller jobs when they're earlier on in their career to build their abilities, to build their ability to manage, to speak to players, to develop a game model, that kind of stuff. And then the fact that they've got that heritage in the game as players will probably afford them those opportunities, but they should be parachuted directly into it, because I think that ultimately will be a bad thing. So if there are instances of managers being successful following that model, I think that could be a positive thing. It does still create just a different kind of gilded cage, but it's maybe one that has a greater propensity for development and for talent identification. I also just think it means that other football will probably be more interesting to watch. I think Michael Cox did a piece, probably like a month or two ago in The Athletic, where he was talking about how top-level European football is kind of moving towards a similar single tactical point of, a certain style of build-up, pushing either wingers very wide or fullbacks very wide, creating this kind of 3-2-5 shape in attack, that sort of stuff. And there are variations to that, but there aren't many. And actually, ultimately, what could happen is that top-level European football just becomes incredibly dull to watch from a tactical perspective and is illuminated only by moments of individual brilliance. This is a really nice segue into PSG Lyon, isn't it? And that actually it's much, much more fun to watch, I don't know, Bundesliga 2. And this is going to make me sound like a horrendous football hipster type, and that's not the point I'm making. If everything is moving towards the same point, it just isn't as much fun to watch if what you want to watch is tactical battle.
I'm different to you. I don't watch football with tactical battles in mind per se. What I want is the idea that interesting stuff can happen in a game, and whether that's goals, set piece routines, interesting results. The Zweites Bundesliga point is interesting because I've moved to a city where there are two teams in the same division, and I kind of have a vested interest in the performance of both, and so I've watched a lot of that division, and it's interesting. Okay, so, a couple of the pitches are a bit shit, a few of the players are a bit of an odd shape, and there are some consistency issues, but that makes it a richer competition. Like if you look at Hamburg's history over the last few decades, they've become the club who they're kind of like a German Spurs in a way. They find ways to fail. So I kind of live between.
You really have arrived at home, haven't you? Or home from home.
I should have just moved to Munich. Yeah, I did tell Jalen that's what we should have done. Yeah,
that would have been easier.
But it's interesting because if you're a fan of those teams, yeah, okay, it probably takes a few years off your life, but at the same time, that's why you watch football. You don't watch just for the sake of, well, I want to see the 3-0 win, the procession and, the goal scored by my £80 million players all the time. Yes, of course. you kind of want to see, like, I just want to see simple things, players improving, problems being corrected. And I think it's easier to see that stuff at a lower level of the game, because higher up, you can cover up a lot of deficiencies and flaws with very expensive, very gifted individual players. And that maybe is our segue to PSG against Lyon. Go for it. You watch this one.
I did watch this one, and I got the piss taken out of me on Twitter slightly for saying that it was a 6-goal game, but it was really boring. Apparently that was,
hey, no, I know what you mean.
That was too on brand.
No, I think that's very fair, because I woke up this morning and I watched it, not live, of course, and it bored me. I was watching it on the Zone, and it was just like, yeah, some good goals, and well done, Kylian Mbappe. I love watching him, but what an anticlimax! One of the biggest games in Europe this weekend. It was a massive anticlimax.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that there was a genuinely electric moment for me when Mbappe broke down the left-hand side and crossed it to Moise Kean and forced a really good save out of Lopez. But that was about the only point of that match where I felt anything approaching excitement. And I mean, obviously, again, I don't really get excited about anything.
What a rare territory for you that would be.
There was even an air of inevitability when Verratti played that through ball to Mbappe for his second goal. As soon as that ball was played, you're like, yeah, well, he's going to score. There wasn't, I didn't see anything beyond PSG having greater individual quality, Lyon trying, but not. There was just no energy. There was no fizz, and I suppose what I worry about again is if PSG, with the extraordinary array of talent that they had, and obviously this is the game that Neymar came back for as well, when he was subbed on. If they were to win the Champions League, which I think is possible, I don't think it's nailed on by any stretch, but they've got the right pieces in place. What does that do for Ligue 1? Does it give Ligue 1 a greater degree of credibility, and we can put to bed these awful Farmers League jokes and so on? Because I also watched Nice against Marseille and actually really enjoyed that game. Or will it just further entrench PSG at the top of that league, and everything else becomes processional, and the best players from that league are hoovered up by other top clubs, because frankly they know that unless they move to PSG they're not going to win anything in that league, so they may as well go somewhere else. And players like Ryan Cherki, for example, the 17-year-old at Lyon, who is a very exciting player, even though he got 15-16 minutes to show anything in this game. There is no way he's going to stay at Lyon if PSG are just going to win every time. What's the point for him? What's his challenge? Your challenge as a professional elite athlete is not to finish second consistently, is it? So I just worry about what might happen. It could be good. It could make Ligue 1 much more popular, and teams elsewhere are then challenging, and players want to go there, and coaches want to test their mettle against the European Championships, or it could just really fuck it.
Well, this is the thing, because when I was watching it, I was thinking about the centre midfielder with the slick hair. It's Kakare, isn't it?
Maxence Kakare.
Yeah, I think of a player like that, who I think he's really talented. I think he's in a certain type of midfield in the future. He's really going to work. He's a very skillful, technically good player. And you think you expose someone to too many, 4-0 down at home games at that stage of their career, and they're going to be conditioned to think of a club like Lyon as a stepping stone.
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
that's really damaging. I don't necessarily see that much of a problem in PSG winning a Champions League or dominating Ligue 1, because that's just a reality of the game. It's not healthy, no, but it's just what it is, and France is by no means the only competition where that happens. But if someone like that is experiencing what is a humiliating result on their own ground, I know they pulled a few goals back, but whatever, really, that's not great. And you have this situation potentially where all the clubs other than PSG take risks on developing players, or they shop from less than fashionable destinations. And whilst PSG can take players from Barcelona, Juventus, potentially Liverpool, Arsenal, Spurs, that kind of market. Teams like Marseille, Nice, obviously Lyon, you're dealing in reclamation projects. I mean, Memphis Depay is a really good example of that. They spent a lot of money on him, and he's been largely excellent, injuries aside. But at the same time, his stock was never lower than it was when he left Manchester United because of the things that happened there. And so you have this natural gap, which is you have a situation where the lower clubs can never, ever catch up because they're always taking risks on players, and they're always spending limited budgets on players that need time to adjust and develop. And then the point at which they might become a threat, they're picked apart by, I don't know, a team that, I quite fancy Depay because he's now an off-the-peg player that can make a difference immediately.
Yeah.
So
it feels like France, I mean, obviously, everyone sat up and started paying attention to Ligue 2 when Kanté and Mahrez were discovered there. But the idea of scouting in France, obviously, I mean, there's various teams like Mainz have done it very successfully, for example. Leeds' best signing recently, Rafinha, came from Ligue 1. I worry that actually, effectively, that competition just becomes a scouting pool for the other big leagues in Europe.
It becomes an Eredivisie, Alex.
Yeah, exactly this. But it becomes an Eredivisie without the Eredivisie's competitiveness, because obviously,
without Ajax Feyenoord in PSV.
Well, yeah, but also recently, AZ Alkmaar have been pretty good. Groningen can sometimes threaten. There are other teams in that division as well, and there's also, I suppose, the similarity is that these divisions both pour a lot of money into youth development, and if you took a look at the top European games over the last couple of weeks, the number of French academy products that are popping up at other top teams, because they're being poached even at like 18, 19. It's, France has really nailed something, but I worry that their ability to develop younger players, which all stems from Clairefontaine and partly the work of people like Gerard Houllier, that just turns them into a selling league, particularly then with the media pro situation. Just being really negative about French football, aren't we? But
people should be fearful. Like, the media pro situation is incredibly serious. Yeah, and it hasn't even started to bite really yet.
This is the issue. You can talk about things like European Super League or a revamped Champions League format that are, from a competition perspective, are basically devised to entrench a particular hegemony within the game, and that in itself is worrying. But it's the contributory situation that operates in the background of all of that. And France, the top two domestic French leagues, are, to me, they're a really clear example of the circumstances that kind of contribute to making those things almost an inevitability at some point. And then football becomes 20 big clubs across Europe, all playing each other all the time, and everybody else is basically a feeder club for them. And that feels like it's something that's going to happen, and it'll be really bad if it does.
Yeah, my appetite for this has really just fallen through the floor now. By the way, if people will have heard Alex mention Clairefontaine, we did a video on this quite a few, I think it's probably about a year and a half ago now, so look that up on our YouTube channel. Very, very interesting. And at the time that Clairefontaine started to make a name for itself and started to be recognised, it was quite new to have like centres of excellence, and you can have, France was very much a market leader in the development of young players in the kind of modern era. Anyway, we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to talk about West Ham Arsenal. Okay, we're going to do West Ham Arsenal now. First, before we do that, I'm going to give a little mention to Ozan Tufan's goal. I watched Besiktas against Fenerbahce with my father-in-law on Sunday night. He's a Galatasaray fan, so he was kind of hate watching it and wasn't really wanting any kind of outcome, but kind of, yeah, it was just about happy with the draw. But anyway, really, really good goal. Lovely pick up, drive inside, whipped into the top corner. Really good second half as well.
Can I just also mention very quickly
You can.
Kefren Turam's performance for Nice against
Yeah,
Marseille.
you really liked this, didn't you?
Yes, I really liked it. I went so far as to call him Moussa Dembele-esque, which
Hang on, which Moussa Dembele though?
the former Spurs one. He just he has this ability to carry the ball through midfield, and then rather than just being press resistant and looking impressive, to play a good pass after it. He was covering around the pitch a lot. He scored a header. Just a really impressive young player. I mean, Nice are a great team to watch when things click, but he really stood out. So that's another young French player who will get picked off by somebody better soon enough.
Do we have a position that we can nail down for him, or is that kind of a work in progress?
I think he's probably an 8. I think he would work on the left hand side, probably of a midfield 3 in a kind of slightly Metzalery way. He could also sit deeper and be a link between the back 4 and the rest of the midfield. But I think what you want from a player like that is penetrative running as well. The ability to carry the ball forwards into the box rather than just doing it to break the first line of the press. I think he'll probably be more effective from an attacking perspective if he plays slightly higher up, rather than just kind of keeping things taking over. But that's the interesting thing with these young players, isn't it? That they're still at that stage where I guess their positional function and what they concentrate on can still be moulded to a degree. But it's interesting. Nice's coach, Adrien Urcia, has a long history of working within youth systems as a technical director and as an under-19s coach and so on. So I think it could be very beneficial for Nice's younger players, people like Amin Ghouri as well, to work under a coach who's got that side to his game.
That is interesting. I went a bit sensible transfers here because I noted down that Fenerbahce's goalkeeper Altay is very, very impressive. I've seen quite a lot of Turkish football over the last month or so, and he's a very, very fine goalkeeper.
Is he quite young?
Yeah, he's 22.
Yeah.
But I really like him. So if you get the chance to see him, probably not until next season because I'll be back in European competition next year. But he's a good player. He'll go somewhere. Anyway, right. West Ham Arsenal. This was an absolute wonderful, joyous bin fire of a football match. When there was just as much good as bad. It was really, really fun. It's an interesting situation because on the one hand, you could say Mikel Arteta should not find himself 3-0 down inside 35 minutes at West Ham, sure, and then 3-1 at half time. I think what my takeaway was that okay, that happened, but he fixed it. And that's the thing that you focus on, because obviously things went wrong in the first half. Defending was just dismal. Like the second goal was just. I heard a few people. I think James McNicholas referred to it on Twitter as unprofessional. I think that about sums up. It's like dreadful goalkeeping. Xhaka not even looking after the free kick had been taken. Just rubbish. Absolute rubbish. It's just unforgivable. But you've had a half like that, and you recover. Discuss.
Yeah, the recovery was definitely impressive. I think it was a weird game in that West Ham's goals did feel a little bit like they came. Certainly, the first two felt like they came from Arsenal just not really being awake. And I know that this was a point that was made in commentary because I saw it discussed that they sort of sleptwalked a little bit, at least through the first 30 minutes. There were clearly players that were trying to inject a bit of energy, and I know we'll talk a little bit about Ødegaard, who I thought was really, really good.
I agree, yeah.
And interestingly, I think, with Ødegaard, there's been this slight question about, is he a kind of progressive 8 or is he a 10? He does a lot of things well. It felt to me very much like this was the game where he became a 10 properly, with his ability to play intelligent passes that close to the line, to be able to get the ball into the box, also to take some shots, but at the right moments rather than necessarily just every time. But we can come back to him. I think I think Arsenal's goals resulted from Arsenal being better at attacking.
Sorry, I don't know why I laughed at that. But yeah,
Well,
I know you're absolutely right.
My point being, so the second West Ham goal was just a clusterfuck, right, from start to finish in terms of, and it was interesting. I'm pretty sure that kind of goal will get greater. I mean, the ball was stopped; it was legit, but I think the protests around it will be ignored because of what happened with the Lewis Dunk situation for Brighton. And teams should be alive to that, therefore. Teams should be thinking...
You can't turn your back, Alex.
The Premier League screwed up on a quick free kick, so teams are going to want to look to exploit this situation. let's stay switched on. And even if everybody else is not awake, Leno's goalkeeping was just reprehensible. Whereas when Arsenal scored, it felt like it was much more the result of really aggressive... dynamic play, whether it was Chambers overlapping on the right back and firing crosses in, whether it was Ødegaard pulling the strings, Lacazette with a really good finish for that first goal.
It
was a 3-3. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, because you mentioned Callum Chambers. You know the Lacazette lob that was cleared off the line.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever seen Callum Chambers play a lofted ball the outside of his right foot over the top of a defence before. It's absolutely perfect. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was a weird one, wasn't it? Because Chambers played. I can't remember the other team. Oh, it was Burnley, wasn't it? Chambers plays on the right hand side of that defence to allow them to form a 3 and build up with Chambers tucking inside because he's taller. He's got experience as a centre back.
Covers the back post when they don't have the ball as well, which is
right.
Nice,
this kind of thing, and then it felt like, and in that first half, you could see Tierney was playing ahead of the winger sometimes on that left-hand side. He was getting so far up the pitch that Arsenal had this really kind of asymmetrical 3-2-5 again, with Saka really tucking in quite a lot and Aubameyang weirdly out on the right for some of the time. And then it felt like they reverted to more of a kind of balanced approach play with one of the midfielders dropping back to form that 3 at the back and allowing both fullbacks to push up. And all of a sudden, we see this side to Callum Chambers' game that I really don't recall seeing previously. Just a lot of dynamism, really good final ball a lot of the time as well. It wasn't just that he was getting up and down. He was actually doing something with it. And right fullback has been a problematic position for Arsenal. I think it's fair to say that Bellerin has not been exceptional for a while.
Yeah.
And... have they accidentally, in order trying to counter one particular facet of West Ham's game, which is height and delivery from set pieces, have they actually found a longer-term solution for that position?
Adonis, Jordan, you should come on for a little bit.
I'm here.
Yeah, how are you responding to this team? Because if I was a fan, as an outsider, I can see both sides of the coin. As a fan, how do you feel about it? You watch. I know it's easier when you come back from a deficit rather than surrender a lead. But what do you take away from a game like that?
I think Arteta puts it best when he talks about Arsenal being a side of two faces. I think everybody knows that about Arsenal as well. But to be able to sleepwalk against a team that's done as well as West Ham this season and still come away with a point and probably feel like we should have won it in the end as well if it had gone on for 5 or 10 minutes more, makes me feel optimistic, makes me feel like we've got a really good side with problems that I do believe Arteta will fix in the end.
With power, isn't it? Because there was never a point really where you thought Arsenal weren't going to come back. And I think we were talking in the WhatsApp, and Adonis made the point about West Ham's approach to having a 3-goal lead was a bit small time. It was a bit sort of inferiority complex and, oh, please don't hurt us now. We haven't got anything more to offer, which I just... We talked about this last week with the Sassuolo-Torino game I was watching. Exactly the same situation. You build your lead, you find yourself in an advantageous situation, and then you're so baffled by how good and how lucky and how well you've played that you kind of you sit there waiting for the worst thing to happen. And it's just I find it maddening to watch. I don't... there's no justification for it because you don't have to... there aren't two settings for a football team. There aren't, it's not just either progressive or ultra negative. like even if you just play Football Manager, that. Like there's a couple in between where you'd be like,
I was
okay,
literally thinking of Football Manager at this point.
but it's the same. Like it's the same
But you
thing,
do.
Alex.
If you go defensive, go defensive on Football Manager, you know that you're going to give the opportunity to the other team to create sustained phases of pressure. Like, I do understand that there are certain points in a game where you should try and do certain things to hold on to a lead. But it always does seem to me, like you said about the Sassuolo Torino game, it seems very, very strange to abandon that which has got you to the point that you're at, to then do something that is quite often the inverse of that, including bringing on Mark Noble. There's no excuse for bringing on Mark Noble at any point.
I feel a bit sorry for him because this is his victory lap, and this is his sort of his farewell parade, and things just keep going wrong. But the thing is that one of the advantages, like particularly for Arsenal, for West Ham, one of the advantages of playing progressively is that you are better at that end of the pitch. And also in West Ham's case, like it was a really smart way to approach the game. Let's not tiptoe into the match. Let's examine an Arsenal defence which cannot stop making mistakes, and stupid ones as well. Like when the kind of things that happen week to week to Arsenal occur, like the result is a lack of confidence, fearfulness, all the things which they successfully took advantage of in that first 30 minutes. And then as soon as Lacazette scores, you know West Ham have to score again. And instead of pursuing that goal, you sit there and you allow, like you talked about Ødegaard earlier, and I completely agree. I thought it was great. I like where he was receiving the ball as well. That's really that was part of the number 10 thing for me. But then you make it easy on players like that. You wait for them to load their guns and fire their shots. And it's so self-defeating. And I've been conditioned by what's been going on in North London and my own team's approach to games sometimes, and that's leaking into this. But it's very difficult to defend because you have to retain. Okay, if you're defending a 3-0 lead against Man City, fine, because they're very, very powerful and they can hurt you in so many ways. And really, you cover up and hope not to get hurt. I understand, that's fine. Against Arsenal, like, they have that power at the other end of the pitch. As soon as you start to ask questions, you create instability in their own side. And that has to be the priority. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, the energy of that game felt to me when West Ham scored their third. I was convinced that if things continued as they were, that West Ham would win. But it also felt like the kind of energy that could result in a team getting genuinely dicked.
Yeah.
And then
the technical term.
The technical term, yes. I like to bring that level of thoughtfulness to my analysis.
It's like Joe's here. It's brilliant.
And then as soon as Arsenal scored, it was inevitable that it would be a draw, if not an Arsenal victory. And it's quite rare to. I mean, Spurs allowed West Ham to come back from a 3-goal deficit to a draw, but that game didn't feel as inevitable. That was more
in
like
7 minutes. That was
that's true, yeah, but
it was worse
also
in a lot of ways.
worse in a little. But this was a game that really, I think, flipped, 180 degrees from being West Ham are rampant, they could get another 2 or 3 goals here, to they're going to lose.
Yeah,
and it's really weird to feel the dynamic of a match shift that quickly.
The 2 moments when they actually put together a couple of attacking phases, they look like they might score. Antonio probably should have scored with that effort that came back off the post. And there was another moment where Luis got in Lino's way and Jesse Lingard nearly had an open goal. Like, I forget what led up to that. But, so every time West Ham crossed the halfway line, they were asking questions. They were still a threat in the game. And you just thought, that's your prompt. That's your prompt. That's your way to safety. Like, chase the light. Alas, anyway, we should probably finish because this has gone on for a long time and we'll get shouted at by Joe when he comes back. So thank you very, very much for joining me and Alex. Have a good week, everybody. Not Andrea Agnelli, of course. I hope you might get a parking ticket or step on a plug or something. But goodbye from me, and goodbye from Alex.
Goodbye.
The Athletic.